garden planning. So we are about a month away from being able to start our seeds around here. So I thought I would just show you what I do every year to help me plan the garden that we are going to have for the year. Every single year our garden has been growing. We started about 4 seasons ago, and I had only 2 4x12 foot boxes, and that has substantially expanded over the last 4 seasons to where now we have a raised bed / in-ground area where we have 8 raised beds that are all 4x12 feet. We also have 4 in-ground beds in that garden. And then this year we are expanding even more. I am doing a 34 by 47 in-foot garden area that's right next to the garden that has all the raised beds. So that's something new that we have for this year. And we are also adding a berry patch that's gonna measure around 30 by 100 feet. So I've got my hands full this year. But I just thought I would show you guys what I do to plan our garden. Now I know there are so many ways to do this, but this way has just worked for me over the last couple of seasons. So I just thought I would share it with you. So what I do to kind of get started is I start a list of all the seeds that I'm going to need for the year. I'll talk more about seeds when I do our actual seed haul and why I have so many seeds that I needed to buy this year. But for starters, what I do is I just make a log. What I do is I look at my garden from last year and see how many plants I had and all of that, and then I see what I want to expand. One way that I keep track of that is I make, like I said, a little log. This is my planner that I'm using for this year. This is my first time ever using a planner. Usually I just use a regular notebook and some graph paper, but I decided to opt for a planner this year just to kind of keep everything in one spot. What I started doing is I just made a list of all of the vegetables that we want to grow. I've got potatoes, tomatoes, onions, carrots, lots and lots of herbs, different types of lettuces, that kind of thing. So what I like about this particular log is that I was able to put the type of seed, the variety of seed, and then I can also put where I'm getting the seed from. So that way next year, when I'm looking at this, I can think, oh yeah, I remember those tomatoes, they did really well and I got them from Seed Savers. So this just helps me keep organized in that sense. The other thing that I really like about this log is that I'm able to put how many of each plant that I'm going to need. What I did is last year, I just looked at what I had in my gardens. So for example, I had, I think, about 30-ish plants of tomatoes. And now this year I'm gonna have around 70 tomatoes. But I saw our need from last year, but I wanna do a little bit more, so I'm gonna need some extra plants for this year. So that's why I bumped it up from that 30 to around 70 plants this year. What I like is that this log is able to keep track of all the plants. So next year, when I'm looking, I'm like, oh, okay, 70 tomato plants did really well for us. I think I'll keep up with that. And then I know exactly how many to get for next year. Something else that I think about when I'm planning is I do crop rotating. Now, not everybody does crop rotating, and that's okay. But for me, it just works because right now with all my little ones, it's hard for me to think about, okay, let's do a soil test, check the pH, check all the minerals, the micro minerals, all that jazz. Instead, I just focus on crop rotating. And it's really simple to do crop rotations. You can either just do a simple internet search, or like in this planner that I have, this particular author has just a basic map of how to go about it. So what they did is, let's take for example that they have root vegetables up here in this one, and then the next box is fruits. So what they're telling you is that, let's say I had carrots in one box one year, then to crop rotate, I would need to put something like tomatoes in that box for this year. And that's just to help balance out nutrients, because sometimes different plants take away different nutrients, or they give a lot of nutrients to the soil. So I definitely pay attention to crop rotation when I'm planning out all of our gardens, so that way I know that I'm doing the best that I can for that particular space. Then the fun part begins. So what I mean by that is I actually get out my graph paper, I get out a pencil and a pen, and I start graphing everything out. Now I know that there's fancy programs out there, and I definitely used one our first year. I talk about that in my video last year about how I used that program, and it worked really well. But as I'm getting a little bit more used to this, I'm just kind of doing it on my own. I use internet searches to figure out spacing, all that jazz. But I love writing everything down on graph paper. So what I did was I wrote out all 3 of our new garden spaces and I drew them to scale. So for me, what I was able to do for like our raised beds, because of their size, I was able to make 1 box each a foot. So then that way I could draw exactly 12 squares by 4 squares when I'm doing the actual boxes. But the reason why I love that is because it helps with spacing so much. Spacing is such a huge thing for me because I want to make sure that I'm using the ample amount of space that I am given with my gardens, and I want to make sure that I'm putting enough plants in that particular space. So that's what the graphing paper helps me with. For example, I know because I'm using the graphing paper that for like my tomato beds, I am able to put 14 tomato plants in there comfortably, so that way they're not overcrowded or I'm not using the space enough. So like I said, I just do that with all of our garden spaces that we're having. So that way I just make sure that I've got the ample amount of space that I need for my stuff. The other thing that I really had to think about this year because of doing that in-ground huge garden is that I had to think about what types of plants would do well in clay soil. We have clay soil, and sometimes that sucks. But luckily our soil is nutrient dense. However, the soil itself is very compact, so that can lead to a problem. One thing that we did to help it just a little bit this coming year was last year at the end of harvest, we ended up taking some mulch and mulching the entire area. The reason why we did that is because the mulch should help break down that clay a little bit year after year. So I'm hoping here in the next couple of years, we'll have some really good topsoil to work with. But for now, I needed to really make sure that in that particular area, I was just using vegetables and herbs that do well in clay, just in case. So some of the things that I put in this area are corn, beans, cilantro, peas, and I'm even going to try our potatoes in there. I've seen a couple of videos where people have put potatoes in mulch itself. And last year I noticed, now this isn't potatoes, but I put some kale. I'd actually just thrown it out over our other garden and it landed in the mulch. I didn't do anything with it. I didn't plant it. I didn't water it, nothing. And that stuff took root. So I'm wondering, and I'm gonna kind of experiment here, that when I do our potatoes, I can plant them actually in the mulch, just barely on top of that topsoil, and I wanna see if they take root and do really well. So fingers crossed they will work, but potatoes are supposedly really well in clay, so hopefully I'll be okay either way. Some herbs that I focused on for that area are yarrow, lemon balm, and sage. I had read that they do really well in clay, so I am hoping that that will work out. And because we have that mulch, I'm hoping that that will help with the seedlings because they won't have to root down as far into the clay because they'll have the mulch as a top layer. So now something that I had to think about as well with our berry patch is that it is going in our front yard, and right now our front yard is just grass. So we didn't do anything to doctor it, nothing like that. Last year, I had ordered some strawberries from a local company that's here in my state. We just have 2 beds in our raised bed area that has those strawberries. And all we did was put a little bit of compost and some mulch over the top, and then I just dug down into it and planted those strawberries, and they did fantastic. And I think the reason why they did so well is because they're from my area. So I'm hoping that that will be the case with this berry patch, because I bought all of these berries from this company. So in that particular area, we are looking at having elderberries, strawberries, blackberries, black raspberries, and raspberries. And I'm hoping because of them being in my area, at least this first year, they will be able to take root and do as well as those strawberries did last year. And one final thing that I thought about this year as I was planning our garden is I wanted to try some companion planting. Now in the past, I've paid attention to what vegetables can grow next to each other, but I've never really thought of what could grow maybe with the plant itself, if that makes sense. So for example, in my garlic patch, I'm actually going to be growing sage around it. So I'm hoping that by doing that, I'm getting a little bit extra, but again, I'm also using my space as best that I can. I've done that with my pumpkins this year. I'm gonna try, we've never grown pumpkins before. I'm gonna try adding kale with them. With my tomatoes, I'm gonna try adding basil and carrots. So again, these are all, I'm just kind of doing them around the perimeter. You can, with some of these, actually interplant, if that makes sense. So like in between your, say, tomato plants, you could put in the basil, but I'm not quite confident enough with that yet. So I'm just gonna work with the perimeter. And I've also heard that doing things like that can help with pests because of like the smell of the herbs. I've heard that that can deter some pests. So I'm hoping maybe that will work out in my favor. Last year, I didn't have as many pests, so I'm hoping that that will be the case this year. I didn't do anything really that special. One thing I did have to pay attention to was I put marigolds in my tomatoes. I've heard that if you put marigolds in your tomatoes, it's supposed to deter hornworms, but I got the opposite. I had the marigolds planted in my tomato beds and they actually attracted them. As soon as I ripped out the marigolds, I barely saw any hornworms. Doing maybe like the basil around them will actually keep them away because of the smell. So we'll see. But that's something that I thought about, was the companion planting in the sense of doing the interplanting. All right, well, I hope that gives you guys a good idea of what we are doing in our garden this year. If you have any questions with you starting your own garden, of where to start or how to use your space, please by all means let me know in the comments below. I would love to answer any questions that you have, or if you have any words of encouragement for me as I take on this huge task this year with those 2 new garden beds, I would love to hear from you. But other than that, I will talk to you guys later. Bye.